I've worked in a number of strip clubs in Las Vegas and have seen my fair share of horrors within that environment, of which I'm going to tell you one. First off, let me just say it gets so difficult sometimes living as a woman, more so being a stripper. While working at different strip clubs as a stripper, there's one thing most common with the men coming in. A lot are too shy to communicate with beautiful women. And as exotic dancers, we do our best to always make these types feel comfortable and relaxed. This has especially worked the most for me because these men tend to be one of the biggest spenders of the night. I had always thought it was cute when I see guys become shy around me, but one horrible experience snapped me out of my delusion. Last year, there was a group of guys who walked into the club on a Friday night in suits and ties. They were businessmen who were around for some new investment opportunities in Las Vegas and thought to stop by at a club. They paid for a private area, as well as some drinks and dances, and I remember this being one of our most successful nights at the club. These guys handed out $20 bills like it was nothing. And of course, things were intense in the private area. I hadn't been invited to join in yet, though. After a while, one of the men beckoned on me as I walked by, and I approached him. He told me to take care of his friend, pointing at a guy who had his head bowed to the table. For the purpose of this video, I'd call him Nathan. He was so shy and cute, I remember thinking that. So I took him into a private room and just did my thing. I made about $10,000 from our session together without having to do too much. We only just talked and shared a few laughs and drinks, and boom, $10K. It was really a big night, but what was to come wasn't expected. After that night, the men continued frequenting the club every night after work, and I would quickly approach Nathan with hopes of making him a regular. They were soon done with their business in Las Vegas, after a week, and it was time to leave. So on their last day at the club, Nathan asked for my number, and we began texting. Our texts were pretty normal, even after they'd left the city. But there was something else. He wanted a relationship. He would always send really romantic texts and some money to go with. After once or twice of accepting, I began rejecting his offers, despite how tempting it was, because in our line of work, it's not advisable to have any romantic relationship with customers, nor give them any hope of a chance at all. And I also really wasn't ready for a romantic relationship. It's not something I've ever wanted since becoming a stripper. Despite my rejections, Nathan kept being persuasive until things took a whole new turn. He began sending some really disturbing messages, saying that I deceived and tricked him, that I led him on and made him believe I was into him. I tried making him see otherwise, but it wasn't helping, so I just blocked him. He still found a way to text me though, using a different line to send threatening messages. On one of the messages, he sent a picture of a hole dug up in the woods, with a text saying, "What should your tombstone say, darling?" I was horrified and had to report the case to the police, who then began their investigations. This went on for quite some time, until the texts from Nathan stopped and they closed the whole investigation. When I asked why, they couldn't provide any tangible reasons, and now that I think about it, Nathan could be a very well-connected person. Who knows? They assured me that I had no reason to worry anymore, that the issue had been taken care of, and I just had to take their word for it. It's been a year now, and I haven't received any more texts from Nathan, so that's that. However, the eerie feeling that he's still out there torments me every time I see a new shy guy at the club. My story has been a haunting one ever since it happened. Despite getting justice at the end of it all, I've been so messed up and can't seem to forget about it. It was at a house party hosted by Antonio, who was one of the regulars at the strip club where I worked. He paid for our services as exotic dancers at the party, so we came in to honor this and also in hopes of making some good money. At the party, everything was going well and nice. Us dancers did our best to entertain those who needed us to. I went into the kitchen to get some drinks when I felt someone get up close behind me. It was one of Antonio's friends who usually came to the club with him, so I easily recognized him. He made some lewd suggestions to me, asking that we get into a room and have some fun, but I firmly declined the offer and retreated to the living room where I stayed with some colleagues who were already giving lap dances. This wasn't a new thing with men asking for sexual favors from strippers, but there was something about this particular guy that always sent shivers down my spine. As the party went on, I felt the need to use the restroom, so I approached Antonio and asked for directions, which he provided nonchalantly. I went upstairs, but soon got lost in that maze of a house, finding myself heading in the wrong direction. As I moved through the hallway, I could hear faint noises coming from one of the rooms. My curiosity was piqued, so my instincts led me to open the door. But when I did, a horrible situation lay before my eyes. One of my colleagues was being assaulted by a group of men. They had covered her mouth, so her screams weren't loud enough to reach those outside, but I could hear them thanks to my good hearing. I couldn't suppress my scream from the shock I felt, and this led to me being caught and dragged into the room. Fortunately, though, a partygoer who had witnessed my abduction broke into the room and quickly alerted the others who were nearby. Their swift response led to the arrest of the men. Before they were taken away, I was able to get a glimpse of one of the culprits, who was the same man that asked for lewd favors from me in the kitchen. They all faced trial and were found guilty for the heinous acts they committed. This ordeal caused a lot of damage to the atmosphere at Antonio's house and to my mental health. But the one who was most affected was my colleague, who couldn't continue working as a stripper. She had to travel back to her home country and seek support from her family to get through the trauma she experienced. It was really a nightmare. Please do keep me anonymous, as this is a sensitive story which I've really kept to myself for a long time now. There was a time when I was still in college. We had a test in an engineering drawing course. The lecture theater was full and rowdy, with everyone trying to find the best spot to sit for the test. It had two entrances, one on the right and the other on the left, but we had to use the entrance on the right because the other was locked. I kid you not, when I got into the class, there was this girl who walked past me, of which I took good notice of her face because her beauty was so mesmerizing. I turned my eyes after her as she walked out through the door. But when I looked back into the class a few seconds later, I saw this same girl walk past me a second time. I was so shocked, so I quickly turned back once more, just to be sure I had seen that right. When I did, another guy who also observed this walked up to me with the same perplexed expression I had on my face. "Did you see what just happened?" he asked, and I confirmed to have also observed this. Being the curious guy that I was so keen on investigating further, so I tried speaking to her friends, and those I mostly saw around her, to see if perhaps she had an identical twin, but they all confirmed that she didn't. Such a bizarre turn of events only sparked my curiosity even more. She didn't have a twin, but I saw her twice on that day? How could that be? I found her handle on social media through mutual friends, and I did some digging on the internet, scrolling through to see if I could find anything unusual. I didn't really know what I was looking for specifically, but I just kept going through her page. Her Twitter posts over the years were pretty normal, and so were her Instagram posts. I did this for a few more weeks, but I couldn't find anything. Even in class, it all seemed normal with her. I kept asking around and telling what I had seen to everyone, but they didn't believe me and told me I was mistaken, that maybe I was drunk or high and was seeing things. I didn't listen though and continued, but this brought on something fatal. On this particular day, I was at the dining eating and suddenly I started feeling some pain in my legs. Initially, I overlooked and assumed it was from the stress of the football I had played that week because I was really into sports at the time. The pain didn't stop though, but just kept getting worse until I couldn't use my legs anymore. My parents visited so many hospitals in our town and even the teaching hospital in the city, but they all arrived at the same conclusion that nothing was wrong with me. That was when my uncle suggested that we saw a priest. On the night before we were scheduled to meet the priest, I had a dream, or should I say a nightmare, in which this girl appeared to me and said, "This was just a warning." I woke up drenched in sweat and shaking with so much fear, so I quickly picked up my phone and messaged her on Twitter, apologizing for anything I may have done to offend her. I could see the tick mark indicating that she had read the message, but she didn't reply. I was so scared to even do anything but just hide under the sheets and pray for help. It wasn't until morning, when my mother came into my room, that I had noticed the pains in my legs weren't as severe as it used to be. I could at least walk now, and my parents were overjoyed at the miracle they were witnessing. It was so unbelievable, and I burst into tears, feeling relieved for the first time after 3 months of being bedridden. We saw the priest who prayed for me and gave me some verses to read at night before going to bed. I later spoke to my parents to let me change schools, and they finally agreed after much persuasion. So that was how I left that city. My friends had been so inquisitive about what had happened, but I just gave the same answer to everyone. It was a miracle. I feared what could happen if I did otherwise, because what I experienced still remains a mystery on which I have been too scared to speak about until now. Have you ever had that feeling where everything you know to be just a fairy tale or a nightmare actually becomes real? Well, that's what happened when I was put into a boarding school by my parents. We were a small family comprising of my parents and 2 kids, I and my brother. Our little town could almost pass for a village, and there wasn't really a lot of opportunities or modernity to the town, and this really pissed my dad off every time. We grew up indoors, without socializing with neighbors or making friends in our neighborhood, because my dad was always scared of the bad influence that could have over his kids. He wasn't wrong though, because our neighborhood was full of so many vices in gang wars, prostitution, drug abuse, and whatever else you could ever imagine. So when it was time for me to get into high school, my dad suggested that I attended a boarding school in the neighboring state. I was 10 at the time when I was literally shipped off to that school I've come to dread. My experience there was so bad and disheartening, and I remember having a feeling that my dad didn't love me at all. I was too young to understand the reasons behind his actions, which were in a good place, but in that school, I was exposed to things far more menacing than what he dreaded in our town. From the bullying to the high level of sexual misconduct, and lastly, black magic, which was done on school grounds by students. Up until I went to that school, I had never witnessed black magic, but only thought of it as just a myth meant to scare people, until that dreadful weekend. We were having inspections done by the chief housemaster on the 4 houses in the school which students were grouped under. The results were announced at dinner that our house came in last place, and this really angered the seniors. They took us upstairs after dinner and beat us mercilessly without a care in the world. I remember almost fainting, but was rescued by one of the seniors who was fond of me and assumed the role of an elder brother to me in school. This, however, didn't sit right with the other seniors, and they argued that I stayed, but he defended me and asked them to leave me alone. If anyone touches this boy, they would have me to contend with, was what he had said, but that only added to fuel to the fire already brewing. One of the seniors ran into his room, and what we saw next was a machete he was bringing down to cut him. We screamed in horror and ran to our rooms when the machete landed on him. It was so loud upstairs with the 2 seniors fighting and the others trying to separate the fight. We juniors were so scared, and everyone was on their bed crying. The main entrance into the hostel had already been locked, so we couldn't do anything to contact the housemasters. The noise, however, attracted them and the other seniors from the other houses, and they were both taken to the chief housemaster's residence. During assembly on Monday, both seniors were called out, and the principal briefed us on what had happened. I observed both seniors closely, but couldn't see any injuries, which was really weird. I stayed confused until the housemasters opened some boxes and started bringing out some really disturbing items and showing them to the whole assembly. There was a human skull, rings tied with red clothing, bunch of keys binded together, a clay pot, and a host of other items. They explained to us that both seniors were involved in fetish practices, which they'd brought into school grounds from their communities. From the gossip I had heard after, this wasn't a new thing, and a lot of students had been caught doing such in the past. The seniors were asked to remove their shirts, and I couldn't believe my eyes. There was not a single scratch on their bodies. I could recall seeing the cutlass meet his body, but I couldn't find any injury on his body. This sent chills down our spines as the principal continued addressing us. Both seniors were expelled from the school, and I thought this would at least make my dad see reasons to bring me back home, but he didn't, and I was made to spend my remaining years of high school there. There were a few other similar cases, but this one seemed to top the list of my creepy experiences there.